The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Thornfield Palace as Princess Isabella stood before the towering windows of the East Wing Library. Her fingers traced the leather binding of an old journal, one that had belonged to her late mother-in-law, Queen Eleanor. The palace had been unusually quiet since the funeral 3 months ago, but today felt different. Today carried the weight of secrets about to be unveiled. Prince Alexander, her husband of 7 years, had left early for his charitable foundation meeting, unaware that Isabella had discovered something that would change everything. Hidden between the pages of Queen Eleanor's personal diary was a letter that was never meant to see the light of day. The envelope bore Isabella's name in Eleanor's elegant handwriting, with a note attached, "To be given to Princess Isabella upon my death. Eleanor." But the letter had never reached her. Isabella's heart pounded as she remembered the conversation she'd overheard 2 days ago. Lady Victoria Ashworth, Alexander's stepmother, had been speaking in hushed tones to her personal secretary in the Rose Garden. The words that had frozen Isabella's blood were clear. The letter must never surface. It would destroy everything we've worked for. Now, holding the actual letter in her trembling hands, Isabella understood why Victoria had been so desperate to keep it hidden. The contents revealed a truth so devastating that it threatened to shatter not just her marriage, but the very foundation of the royal succession. Queen Eleanor's letter began with an apology that immediately set Isabella's nerves on edge. "My dearest Isabella, if you are reading this, then I am no longer here to protect you from the truth I should have shared long ago. What I am about to tell you will break your heart, but you deserve to know the real reason why our family has kept you at arm's length, despite your unwavering loyalty and love for Alexander." Isabella sank into the velvet armchair by the window, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The morning light seemed to dim as she continued reading, each word feeling like a physical blow to her chest. "The night before your wedding, Victoria came to me with documents, medical records that she claimed proved you could never carry a child. She said it would be cruel to burden Alexander with this knowledge. That it would be better if the truth remained hidden until after you were married, when it would be too late for him to change his mind." Isabella's hands began to shake violently. She had spent 7 years wondering why she hadn't conceived, blaming herself, enduring countless medical consultations and treatments. Alexander had been supportive, telling her that their love was enough, but she had seen the sadness in his eyes during family gatherings when he watched his brother Prince Marcus playing with his children. The letter continued, "I was weak, Isabella. I should have demanded to see these records myself, should have insisted on speaking with you directly. But Victoria was convincing, and she threatened to reveal certain complications about Alexander's birth if I didn't cooperate. I chose to protect my son's legitimacy over your right to know the truth about your own body." Eleanor's words became increasingly difficult to read as tears blurred Isabella's vision. "It was only last month, during my final illness, that I discovered the horrible truth. Victoria had fabricated everything. The medical records were forgeries. You have never been infertile, Isabella. Victoria has been secretly arranging for contraceptives to be added to your daily vitamins for years. She has stolen your chance at motherhood to serve her own agenda." The letter fell from Isabella's nerveless fingers as the full impact of Eleanor's revelation crashed over her. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of believing she was somehow broken, somehow inadequate as a wife and future queen. 7 years of watching Alexander's hopes for children slowly fade, all while Victoria smiled sympathetically and offered her support through their difficult journey. Isabella's mind raced back through countless memories, now seeing them in a horrifying new light. Victoria's insistence on personally overseeing Isabella's health regimen, her recommendation of the specific vitamin supplements that Isabella had dutifully taken every morning. The way Victoria's eyes had gleamed with satisfaction whenever Isabella's pregnancy tests came back negative. But why? What possible reason could Victoria have for orchestrating such an elaborate deception? The answer came in Eleanor's final paragraphs. Victoria's own son, Prince James, is only 2 years younger than Alexander. By preventing you and Alexander from having children, Victoria has been positioning James as the most likely heir after Alexander. She has been playing a long game, Isabella, one that has cost you the family you've dreamed of and Alexander the children he longs for. Isabella remembered Prince James, Victoria's son from her first marriage, whom she'd brought into the royal family when she married the late King Edward. James had always been charming and ambitious, frequently positioning himself at important state functions and gradually taking on more royal duties. Isabella had never seen him as a threat, but now she realized how carefully Victoria had been maneuvering him into position. The library door creaked open, and Isabella quickly folded the letter, slipping it into her jacket pocket. Her heart hammered as footsteps approached, but it was only Margaret, her longtime lady-in-waiting. "Your Highness," Margaret said softly, "are you quite all right? You look rather pale." Isabella forced a smile, though she felt as if her world was crumbling around her. "I'm fine, Margaret. Just tired." Margaret's concerned expression suggested she wasn't convinced, but she simply nodded. "Prince Alexander has returned early from his meeting. He's looking for you. Something about wanting to discuss the Christmas charity gala." The thought of facing Alexander while carrying this devastating secret made Isabella feel physically ill. How could she look into his kind, trusting eyes knowing what Victoria had done to them both? How could she pretend that everything was normal when their entire marriage had been built on a foundation of lies? "Tell him I'll be along shortly," Isabella managed. "I just need a moment to finish up here." After Margaret left, Isabella retrieved the letter and read Eleanor's final words. "I know this revelation will destroy you, dear Isabella, but I pray you will find the courage to expose Victoria's deception. Alexander deserves to know the truth, and you deserve the chance at the family that has been stolen from you. I have hidden additional evidence in my private safe, documents that prove Victoria's manipulation. The combination is Alexander's birthday. Use this evidence wisely, but please do not let my cowardice become your prison." Isabella closed her eyes, feeling the weight of Eleanor's burden now resting squarely on her shoulders. The evidence Eleanor mentioned could expose Victoria's cruelty and clear Isabella's name, but it would also reveal Eleanor's complicity in the deception. It would shatter Alexander's faith in the mother he had adored and trusted implicitly. As she sat in the quiet library, surrounded by centuries of royal history, Isabella realized she was facing an impossible choice. She could confront Victoria privately, demanding an end to the deception and the chance to finally start the family she and Alexander both wanted. But Victoria had proven herself capable of extraordinary manipulation. Who knew what other weapons she might have in her arsenal? Alternatively, Isabella could take the evidence directly to Alexander, exposing the full scope of Victoria's betrayal. But this would also expose Eleanor's weakness and complicity, potentially destroying Alexander's cherished memories of his mother forever. The third option was perhaps the most terrifying. She could say nothing at all, continuing to live the lie that Victoria had constructed, but now with the additional burden of knowing the truth about her stolen motherhood. Isabella stood slowly, her legs still unsteady, and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. In the distance, she could see Victoria walking among the rose bushes with her secretary, the same woman Isabella had overheard discussing the hidden letter. Victoria moved with the confident grace of someone who believed her secrets were safe, her silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sunlight as she gestured animatedly about something. The sight filled Isabella with a rage so pure and intense that it surprised her. For 7 years, she had blamed herself for their childlessness. She had endured whispered speculation from the press about her inadequacy as a wife. She had watched Alexander's face fall month after month when her pregnancy tests came back negative, had seen him struggle to hide his disappointment behind reassuring smiles. All of it had been Victoria's doing. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Darling, I'm in the blue salon whenever you're ready to discuss the gala. Looking forward to working on this with you." Red heart, this simple message, filled with his characteristic warmth and affection, nearly broke her resolve. Alexander had been nothing but loving and supportive throughout their marriage, never once making her feel inadequate despite their inability to conceive. He deserved to know the truth, regardless of how much it might hurt him. But as Isabella made her way toward the blue salon, she realized that Victoria was already there. Through the partially open door, she could hear her stepmother-in-law's melodious voice discussing seating arrangements for the charity gala. Victoria was laughing at something Alexander had said, playing the role of the devoted stepmother perfectly. Isabella paused in the hallway, her hand instinctively moving to the letter in her pocket. She thought about Eleanor's words, about the evidence hidden in the safe, about the 7 years of lies that had shaped her marriage. She thought about the children she and Alexander had never had, the family that Victoria had stolen from them through her calculated cruelty. Taking a deep breath, Isabella straightened her shoulders and walked into the blue salon. Alexander looked up with a warm smile, rising to kiss her cheek, while Victoria offered her usual polite nod of acknowledgement. The scene was perfectly normal, perfectly civilized, and perfectly poisonous. "Isabella, darling," Alexander said, "Victoria has some wonderful ideas for the charity auction. We were thinking of including some of Mother's jewelry pieces. She always said she wanted her possessions to benefit worthy causes." The irony was almost unbearable. Eleanor, who had been too weak to protect Isabella from Victoria's manipulation, was now being praised for her charitable spirit. Victoria smiled serenely, playing her part flawlessly. "What a lovely idea," Isabella heard herself saying, though her voice sounded strange and distant to her own ears. "I'm sure Eleanor would be pleased to know her things are helping others." Victoria's eyes met hers across the room, and, for just a moment, Isabella thought she saw a flicker of something. Suspicion? Fear? But it was gone so quickly that she might have imagined it. As the conversation continued around her, Isabella found herself studying Victoria with new eyes. The perfectly styled silver hair, the elegant posture, the way she subtly positioned herself as the family matriarch now that Eleanor was gone. Every gesture, every word seemed calculated to maintain her position of power and influence. Isabella realized that she was looking at her enemy, someone who had systematically destroyed her chances of happiness while maintaining a facade of care and support. The knowledge burned in her chest like acid, but she forced herself to remain calm, to smile, and nod at appropriate moments. When the meeting finally ended and Victoria excused herself to prepare for dinner, Isabella remained in the blue salon with Alexander. He was reviewing his notes from their discussion, completely unaware that his wife's world had been turned upside down. "You're quiet today," he observed, looking up from his papers. "Is everything all right?" Isabella met his concerned gaze, seeing the love and trust there, and felt her heart break all over again. How many times had he looked at her with that same gentle concern over the years? How many times had he tried to comfort her when another month passed without a pregnancy? How many times had he assured her that their love was enough, even as she could see the longing for children in his eyes? "Alexander," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "what would you do if you discovered that someone you trusted had been lying to you for years? Someone close to our family." His brow furrowed with concern. "That's an odd question, darling. Has something happened?" Isabella's hand moved unconsciously to the letter in her pocket. She could feel its weight there, heavy with secrets and revelations that would change everything. She thought about Eleanor's plea for courage, about the evidence waiting in the safe, about the children she and Alexander had never been allowed to have. "I suppose," she said carefully, "I just wonder how well we really know the people around us." Alexander set down his papers and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. He took her hands in his, and she could feel the callus on his ring finger from years of wearing his wedding band, a reminder of their commitment to each other, a commitment that had been undermined by Victoria's deception. "Isabella, you're worrying me," he said gently. "Talk to me. What's this really about?" For a moment, Isabella wavered. She could pull out the letter right now, watch his face as he read Eleanor's devastating revelation, see his world crumble just as hers had. But something held her back, perhaps the need to be absolutely certain of her next move, or perhaps the desire to gather Eleanor's additional evidence first. "I've just been thinking about the future," she said instead, "about what we want our lives to look like." Alexander's expression softened. "We've talked about this before, love. I know you're disappointed that we haven't been able to have children, but that doesn't change how much I love you. We have each other, and we have meaningful work to do. That's enough for me." His words, meant to be comforting, only deepened Isabella's anguish. He was being noble and selfless, as always, not knowing that their childlessness was the result of calculated sabotage rather than medical reality. Victoria had not only stolen their chance at parenthood, she had also robbed Alexander of the choice to fight for it. What if things could be different? Isabella asked quietly. What if there was still hope for the family we've dreamed of? Alexander's eyes lit up for just a moment before he schooled his expression back to gentle resignation. But Isabella had seen it, the flicker of longing that he'd never quite been able to hide, despite his protestations that their life was complete as it was. "Isabella," he said carefully, "I don't want you to torture yourself with false hope. We've tried everything, consulted the best doctors, have we?" Isabella interrupted, then caught herself. She couldn't reveal what she knew. Not yet. Not until she had all of Eleanor's evidence and a clear plan for how to proceed. Alexander squeezed her hands. "Maybe we should take that holiday we've been talking about. Get away from the palace for a while, just the two of us. Sometimes a change of scenery can help put things in perspective." Isabella nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. A holiday might actually be perfect. It would give her time to process what she'd learned and decide how to move forward. But first, she needed to retrieve the evidence from Eleanor's safe and understand the full scope of Victoria's manipulation. As they sat together in the blue salon, the afternoon light fading outside the tall windows, Isabella felt the crushing weight of her new knowledge. 7 years of marriage built on lies. 7 years of believing she was somehow inadequate. 7 years of stolen chances at the family they both wanted. But perhaps most devastating of all was the realization that Victoria's deception was ongoing. Even now, Isabella was taking those vitamin supplements every morning, unknowingly preventing the conception that she and Alexander longed for. Every day that passed without action was another day of Victoria's triumph, another day of stolen possibility. Isabella made her decision. Tonight, after dinner, when the palace grew quiet and Victoria retired to her chambers, she would find her way to Eleanor's private safe. She would gather the evidence that Eleanor had promised, and then she would decide whether to confront Victoria directly or take the truth straight to Alexander. Either way, the lies would end. The 7 years of deception would be exposed, and Victoria would finally face the consequences of her calculated cruelty. As Isabella and Alexander prepared to leave the blue salon for dinner, she caught sight of herself in the ornate mirror above the fireplace. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, harder, more determined. The naive princess who had trusted blindly and blamed herself for her marriage's shortcomings was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the true nature of the battle she was fighting. Victoria had underestimated her, had assumed that Isabella would remain passive and compliant forever. But Eleanor's letter had awakened something fierce and protective in Isabella, not just for herself, but for Alexander, for the family they'd been denied, for the future that Victoria had tried to steal from them. The game was far from over, but now Isabella knew the rules, and she intended to win. The grandfather clock in the palace corridor chimed midnight as Isabella made her way through the dimly lit halls toward Eleanor's private chambers. Her bare feet made no sound against the cold marble floors, and she had chosen the darkest route through the palace, avoiding the main corridors where night security might patrol. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her resolve remained steady. Dinner had been a torturous affair. Victoria had been particularly charming, regaling them with stories about the upcoming state visit from the neighboring kingdom of Valeria, all while Isabella sat there knowing the truth about her stepmother-in-law's betrayal. Every smile Victoria directed at her, every concerned inquiry about Isabella's health, felt like a knife twisting in an open wound. Alexander had noticed her distraction, of course. He'd asked twice if she was feeling well, his kind eyes filled with worry. The temptation to tell him everything right there at the dinner table had been almost overwhelming, but Isabella had managed to maintain her composure. She needed Eleanor's evidence first. She needed to understand the full scope of Victoria's manipulation before she destroyed their world with revelations. Now, standing before the heavy oak door to Eleanor's chambers, Isabella felt the weight of what she was about to do. These rooms had been sealed since the former queen's death, preserved exactly as she had left them. Alexander had been too grief-stricken to deal with clearing them out, and Victoria had volunteered to handle the task, an offer that now seemed sinister in light of what Isabella knew. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she retrieved the key from her jacket pocket. She had taken it from Alexander's study earlier that evening while he was in the shower, knowing he kept all the palace keys in his desk drawer. The metal felt cold and heavy against her palm as she inserted it into the lock. The door opened with a soft creak, revealing Eleanor's sitting room exactly as it had been 3 months ago. The familiar scent of lavender and old books wafted out, and for a moment, Isabella was transported back to better times when Eleanor had been alive to offer guidance and support. If only she had known then what she knew now. Isabella closed the door softly behind her and moved deeper into the chambers, using the small flashlight on her phone to navigate. Eleanor's personal safe was hidden behind a painting of the palace gardens, something Alexander had mentioned once when discussing family security measures. Isabella found the landscape painting and carefully moved it aside, revealing the steel safe built into the wall. Her fingers shook as she entered Alexander's birthday into the digital keypad. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened, and Isabella wondered if Eleanor had given her the wrong combination. But then there was a soft click, and the heavy door swung open. Inside, Isabella found exactly what Eleanor had promised, and more than she had bargained for. The first document that caught her attention was a medical report from Dr. Harrison Whitfield, the royal family's longtime physician. The date was from 8 years ago, just before her wedding to Alexander. As Isabella read through the report, her blood ran cold. It was an analysis of her medical records, but not the fabricated ones Victoria had supposedly shown Eleanor. These were her actual records, and they confirmed what Eleanor had written in her letter. Isabella was perfectly fertile and healthy. But attached to this report was something even more damning. A handwritten note from Dr. Whitfield to Eleanor, dated just weeks before Eleanor's death. "Your Majesty," it read, "I must inform you that I have discovered irregularities in Princess Isabella's vitamin regimen. The supplements that Lady Victoria has been providing contain high levels of hormonal contraceptives. When I attempted to question Lady Victoria about this, she claimed it was done at Princess Isabella's request for family planning purposes. However, given the princess's well-documented desire for children, I find this explanation highly suspect. I believe Lady Victoria has been deliberately preventing conception without the princess's knowledge or consent." Isabella's hands were shaking so violently now that she could barely hold the papers. Dr. Whitfield had discovered Victoria's deception and had reported it to Eleanor. Eleanor had known the truth in her final weeks and had done nothing to stop it. But there was more. The safe contained a thick folder labeled Prince James Succession Documents. Inside, Isabella found what appeared to be Victoria's detailed plan for ensuring her son's place in the line of succession. There were financial records showing payments to various officials, correspondence with foreign diplomats about marriage alliances, and, most shockingly, a timeline that outlined how Victoria intended to gradually diminish Alexander's capacity to rule. One document in particular made Isabella's blood freeze. It was a medical report about Alexander, one that she had never seen before. According to the document, Alexander had a genetic condition that could potentially affect his ability to have children, but only if he was exposed to certain environmental factors. Victoria had been slowly introducing these factors into Alexander's environment, all while publicly supporting their efforts to conceive. Victoria hadn't just been preventing Isabella from getting pregnant. She had been working to ensure that even if Isabella discovered the truth, Alexander himself would be unable to father children. It was a backup plan, ensuring that no matter what happened, Prince James would remain the most viable heir. Isabella sank into Eleanor's reading chair, overwhelmed by the scope of Victoria's betrayal. This wasn't just about stolen motherhood or succession politics. Victoria had been systematically poisoning both Isabella and Alexander, destroying their health and their dreams while maintaining a facade of loving concern. As she continued reading through the documents, Isabella began to understand the full timeline of Victoria's manipulation. It had started even before the wedding, when Victoria had somehow gained access to Isabella's medical records and realized they would need to be fabricated to support her infertility claims. The vitamin regimen had begun on their honeymoon, a wedding gift for Victoria that Isabella had accepted gratefully. For 7 years, Victoria had been playing an incredibly complex game, maintaining the illusion of being a supportive family member while systematically destroying Isabella and Alexander's chances at happiness. She had even managed to time her manipulations with natural fertility cycles and stress factors, making the childlessness appear completely natural. But perhaps most devastating was the revelation in Eleanor's personal journal, which was also hidden in the safe. Eleanor had discovered Victoria's plot months before her death, but had been blackmailed into silence. Victoria had somehow obtained compromising information about Eleanor's own past, details about Alexander's birth that could have called his legitimacy into question. Eleanor had chosen to protect her son's right to the throne over Isabella's right to the truth. Isabella understood now why Eleanor's letter had been so filled with guilt and shame. The former queen had been caught between two impossible choices: expose Victoria's crimes and potentially destroy Alexander's legitimacy, or allow Isabella to continue suffering in ignorance. Eleanor had chosen what she saw as the lesser of two evils, but her conscience had tormented her until her death. The final document in the safe was perhaps the most damning of all. It was a contract between Victoria and a private medical facility, outlining a long-term plan for gradually making both Isabella and Alexander unable to conceive through a combination of hormonal manipulation and environmental factors. The document was signed and dated just 2 months after Isabella and Alexander's wedding. As Isabella sat there in Eleanor's chair, surrounded by evidence of the most elaborate betrayal she could have imagined, she felt something shift inside her. The crushing sadness and sense of victimization were being replaced by something harder and more determined. Victoria had made a crucial mistake. She had underestimated Isabella's intelligence and resilience. Isabella photographed every document with her phone, creating a complete digital record of Victoria's crimes. The evidence was damning and undeniable, but Isabella knew she needed to be strategic about how she used it. Victoria was clearly capable of extraordinary manipulation and had already proven she was willing to use blackmail to achieve her goals. As she carefully returned the documents to the safe and reset the combination, Isabella's mind was already working on a plan. She couldn't simply confront Victoria with this evidence. The woman would find a way to turn it against her, just as she had with Eleanor. And she couldn't burden Alexander with the full truth about his mother's complicity without careful consideration of the consequences. But there was one person who might be able to help her navigate this treacherous situation, Dr. Whitfield. According to his note, he had suspected Victoria's deception and had tried to warn Eleanor. If Isabella could convince him to come forward with his medical expertise, she might be able to expose Victoria's crimes without immediately devastating Alexander with Eleanor's betrayal. Isabella made her way back through the darkened palace corridors, her mind racing with possibilities. As she slipped back into her and Alexander's private chambers, she found him sleeping peacefully, his face relaxed, and trusting in the dim light from the hallway. The sight nearly broke her heart all over again. He looked so young and vulnerable, unaware that the person he had trusted as a mother figure had been systematically destroying his life. Isabella undressed quietly and slipped in a bed beside him, but sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Victoria's smiling face at dinner, heard her concerned inquiries about Isabella's health, remembered all the times Victoria had expressed sympathy for their inability to conceive. The woman's acting abilities were truly extraordinary. She had managed to torture Isabella for 7 years while appearing to be her greatest supporter. As the hours passed, Isabella's plan began to take shape. She would approach Dr. Whitfield privately and convince him to reveal what he knew about Victoria's manipulation of her medical care. With his professional testimony and Eleanor's documentary evidence, she would have enough proof to expose Victoria's crimes publicly. The scandal would be devastating, but it would also free Isabella and Alexander from Victoria's continued manipulation. But first, Isabella needed to stop taking the vitamin supplements immediately. Every day, she continued Victoria's regimen was another day of stolen possibility. The thought that she might be able to conceive naturally, that she and Alexander might finally have the family they had dreamed of, filled her with a hope so intense it was almost painful. Around 4 in the morning, Isabella made a decision that surprised even her. She got up quietly and went to the bathroom where she gathered all of Victoria's vitamin supplements and flushed them down the toilet. It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt like the first step toward reclaiming her life. As she watched the pills disappear, Isabella felt a surge of power that she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since reading Eleanor's letter, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she and Alexander could be parents, where Victoria's manipulations were exposed, where the truth finally set them free. But she also knew that Victoria wouldn't give up without a fight. The woman had spent years carefully constructing her plans, and she wouldn't allow them to be destroyed easily. Isabella would need to be smarter, more strategic, and more ruthless than she had ever been before. As dawn approached, Isabella finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with images of the children she and Alexander might have, the family that Victoria had stolen from them, and the justice that she was determined to achieve. The naive princess who had trusted blindly was gone forever, replaced by a woman who finally understood the true nature of the war she was fighting. When Isabella woke a few hours later, she found Alexander already up and dressed for his morning meetings. He kissed her forehead gently, his eyes still filled with the concern that had been growing over the past few days. "Feeling better this morning?" he asked softly. Isabella looked into his kind, trusting face and made another decision. She wouldn't tell him about Eleanor's letter or the evidence in the safe. Not yet. But she would begin preparing him for the revelations to come. "Actually," she said, managing a small smile, "I think I'm feeling better. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about taking that holiday. Maybe getting away from the palace for a while would be good for both of us." Alexander's face lit up with relief. "Really? Where would you like to go?" Isabella thought quickly. She needed time and privacy to approach Dr. Whitfield and plan her next moves. "What about the cottage in Scotland? Just the two of us, no staff, no official duties. We could leave this afternoon if you can clear your schedule." The cottage was perfect, isolated enough for private conversations, but with reliable phone and internet service for coordinating with Dr. Whitfield. It would also remove them from Victoria's immediate sphere of influence, giving Isabella space to plan without constantly being under her stepmother-in-law's watchful eye. "Consider it done," Alexander said immediately. "I'll have my secretary cancel everything for the next week. It'll be good for us to have some time alone together." As Alexander left to make arrangements for their trip, Isabella felt a mixture of anticipation and terror. The wheels were now in motion. Within days, she would either have exposed Victoria's crimes and freed herself and Alexander from years of manipulation, or she would have made an enemy of one of the most powerful and dangerous people in the kingdom. But for the first time in 7 years, Isabella felt like she had some measure of control over her own destiny. Victoria's reign of deception was about to end, one way or another, and Isabella was ready to fight for the truth, for her marriage, and for the family that had been stolen from them both. The only question now was whether she would be strong enough to see it through to the end, and whether Alexander would be able to forgive not just Victoria's betrayal, but also the secret that Isabella was about to keep from him, at least until she was ready to reveal everything. The Scottish cottage sat nestled among rolling hills and ancient oak trees, its stone walls weathered by centuries of Highland storms. Isabella stood at the kitchen window, watching Alexander chop firewood in the yard, his breath creating small puffs of vapor in the crisp autumn air. 3 days had passed since they'd arrived at their retreat, and, for the first time in years, she had seen her husband truly relaxed. What Alexander didn't know was that Isabella had spent those 3 days orchestrating the most important phone calls of her life. Dr. Harrison Whitfield had been hesitant at first when Isabella contacted him privately, claiming she needed to discuss some personal medical concerns away from the palace. But when she mentioned Victoria's vitamin supplements and her discovery of Eleanor's letter, the elderly physician's tone had changed dramatically. "Your Highness," he had said quietly during their first conversation, "I've been waiting years for someone to ask me about this. I tried to warn Queen Eleanor, but she was caught in an impossible situation. I've documented everything, hoping that someday the truth would come to light." Now, as Isabella prepared for Dr. Whitfield's arrival at the cottage, she felt the weight of what was about to unfold. The physician had agreed to drive up from Edinburgh with copies of all his medical records and correspondence. More importantly, he had revealed something that hadn't been in Eleanor's documents. He had secretly been monitoring both Isabella and Alexander's health for months, documenting the effects of Victoria's systematic poisoning. "The hormonal contraceptives in your supplements are only part of the picture," he had explained during their second phone call. "Lady Victoria has been far more sophisticated in her approach. Prince Alexander's morning tea contains trace amounts of substances that affect male fertility. His workout supplements have been tampered with. Even the soap in your private bathroom has been specially formulated to disrupt reproductive health. This isn't just about preventing pregnancy. It's about ensuring long-term infertility for both of you." Isabella had nearly dropped the phone. Victoria's plan was more comprehensive and more evil than she had imagined. Not content with temporary prevention of pregnancy, Victoria had been working to permanently destroy their ability to have children, ensuring that even if her deception was discovered, the damage would already be irreversible. But Dr. Whitfield had offered hope along with the devastating revelation. "The good news," he had said, "is that I believe most of the effects can be reversed with proper medical intervention. You're both young and healthy. If we can stop the exposure and begin appropriate treatment, there's every reason to believe you could conceive naturally within months." The sound of Alexander's footsteps on the cottage's front porch interrupted Isabella's thoughts. She quickly moved away from the window, not wanting him to see her anxiety. Dr. Whitfield would arrive within the hour, and then the careful facade she had maintained for the past 3 days would finally crumble. Alexander entered the kitchen with an armload of firewood, his cheeks flushed from the cold air. He had been happier these past few days than Isabella had seen him in months, relieved to be away from the pressures and protocols of palace life. The sight of his genuine contentment made what she was about to do even more difficult. "Fire's all set for this evening," he said cheerfully, washing his hands at the kitchen sink. I thought we could open that bottle of wine we brought and have a proper romantic evening by the fireplace. Isabella managed to smile, though her stomach was churning with nervous energy. That sounds lovely. Alexander studied her face with the intuitive concern of a devoted husband. You're still quiet, though. I thought getting away from the palace would help you relax. I've been relaxing, Isabella said, which wasn't entirely untrue. Being away from Victoria's watchful presence had been an enormous relief, even as she'd been planning the woman's downfall. I suppose I've just been thinking a lot about our future. Our future is whatever we make of it, Alexander said, moving to embrace her. We don't need anyone else's definition of what our marriage should look like. The irony of his words was almost unbearable. Their marriage had been shaped by someone else's manipulations for 7 years, and Alexander didn't even know it. But his embrace was warm and solid, and for a moment Isabella allowed herself to lean into his strength. The sound of a car coming up the gravel drive made them both look toward the window. Alexander's brow furrowed as he saw the unfamiliar vehicle approaching. "Were you expecting someone?" he asked. Isabella's heart began to race. "Actually, yes. I asked Dr. Whitfield to come up. I've been having some concerns about my health, and I wanted to discuss them privately away from the palace." Alexander's expression immediately shifted to worried husband mode. "Concerns? Isabella, why didn't you tell me? What kind of concerns?" "Nothing serious," she said quickly, hating that she was continuing to deceive him even as she prepared to reveal Victoria's much greater deceptions. "Just some questions about my general health and, well, about why we've had so much trouble conceiving." Alexander's face softened with understanding and old pain. "Darling, we've been through this so many times with so many doctors. I don't want you to torture yourself." "Please," Isabella interrupted gently. "Let me talk to Dr. Whitfield. I promise I'll tell you everything afterward." A knock on the cottage door saved her from having to explain further. Alexander went to answer it, greeting Dr. Whitfield with the polite warmth he showed to all the long-serving members of their staff. The elderly physician looked nervous but determined, carrying a leather briefcase that Isabella knew contained the documentation that would change everything. "Dr. Whitfield," Alexander said. "Isabella mentioned she wanted to discuss some health concerns with you. I'll leave you both to talk privately." "Actually, Your Highness," Dr. Whitfield said carefully, "I believe this is a conversation that concerns you both. What I have to share affects Prince Alexander as much as Princess Isabella." Isabella saw Alexander's confusion and felt her carefully constructed plans beginning to shift. She had intended to speak with Dr. Whitfield alone first, to prepare herself for the full revelation before involving Alexander. But the physician clearly had his own agenda for how this conversation should unfold. "Very well," Alexander said, leading them both into the cottage's cozy sitting room. "What's this about?" Dr. Whitfield set his briefcase on the coffee table and looked directly at Isabella. "Your Highness, have you told Prince Alexander about Queen Eleanor's letter?" Isabella's blood turned to ice. "I know, not yet." Alexander looked between them with growing alarm. "What letter? Isabella, what's going on?" For a moment, Isabella considered trying to control the narrative to ease Alexander into the revelations gradually. But Dr. Whitfield's direct approach made it clear that the time for careful management was over. The truth was about to pour out, whether she was ready or not. "Alexander," she said quietly, "I found a letter from your mother, hidden in one of her books. She wrote it for me before she died, but I never received it. It had contained some very disturbing information about Victoria." "What kind of information?" Alexander's voice had taken on the measured tone he used when dealing with potential crises. Isabella looked at Dr. Whitfield, who nodded encouragingly. With trembling hands, she retrieved Eleanor's letter from her purse and handed it to her husband. "It's better if you read it yourself." Alexander took the letter with obvious reluctance, his trained diplomatic instincts already warning him that whatever he was about to learn would be significant. Isabella watched his face as he read, seeing the exact moment when Eleanor's words hit home. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to a kind of devastated disbelief. "This can't be right," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Victoria would never." Mother must have been confused, perhaps affected by her illness. "I'm afraid Queen Eleanor was entirely lucid when she discovered the truth," Dr. Whitfield said gently. "And I have medical evidence to support every claim in that letter." Alexander looked up from the letter, his face pale and stricken. "You're saying that Victoria has been deliberately preventing us from having children? For 7 years?" "More than that," Isabella said, forcing herself to continue despite seeing the pain in his eyes. "Dr. Whitfield has discovered that she's been systematically damaging our fertility, trying to make the effects permanent." What followed was perhaps the most difficult conversation of Isabella's life. Dr. Whitfield methodically presented his evidence, the analysis of the vitamin supplements, the documentation of chemicals in Alexander's food and personal care products, the medical records showing gradual deterioration in both their reproductive health over the years. Alexander listened in stunned silence as the full scope of Victoria's betrayal unfolded. Isabella watched her husband's world crumble with each new revelation, saw him struggling to reconcile the woman he had trusted as a mother figure with the calculating manipulator Dr. Whitfield was describing. "But why?" Alexander asked finally, his voice broken. "Why would she do this to us?" "Prince James," Isabella said quietly. "By ensuring we never have children, Victoria positions her son as your likely heir. She's been playing a long game, Alexander, positioning herself and James to inherit power after you." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander sat staring at Eleanor's letter, his hands shaking slightly as he processed the magnitude of what he'd learned. Isabella wanted to comfort him, to reach out and take his hand, but she sensed he needed space to absorb the shock. "My mother knew," he said finally. "She knew what Victoria was doing, and she said nothing. She was being blackmailed," Isabella said quickly, desperate to defend Eleanor despite her own anger at the former queen's weakness. "Victoria had some kind of leverage over her, something about your legitimacy." Alexander's laugh was bitter and hollow. "So Mother chose to protect my throne while Victoria destroyed our marriage. How fitting." "Your marriage isn't destroyed," Dr. Whitfield interjected firmly. "The damage Victoria has done is largely reversible. With proper treatment and time, both of you should be able to conceive naturally. You're young and healthy, and most of the substances she's been using affect fertility temporarily, not permanently." Isabella felt a surge of hope at his words, but Alexander seemed barely to have heard them. He was lost in his own thoughts, processing the betrayal of two of the most important women in his life. "How long have you known?" he asked Isabella suddenly. 3 days, she said honestly. "I found the letter the morning before we came here. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you, what to do with the information." 3 days, Alexander repeated. "You've been carrying this alone for 3 days." The pain in his voice made Isabella's heart ache. "I wanted to protect you from it, at least until I understood the full scope of what Victoria had done. I thought if I could gather enough evidence, present you with a complete picture." "You thought you had to protect me," Alexander said, and Isabella couldn't tell if he was angry or hurt or both. "I thought I had to be strong enough to handle this," she admitted. "For both of us." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, staring into the cottage's fireplace where the flames flickered cheerfully, oblivious to the devastation unfolding in the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but cold. "What do you recommend we do, Dr. Whitfield?" The physician straightened in his chair. "First, we need to completely eliminate your exposure to the substances Victoria has been using. That means changing your entire routine: food, supplements, personal care products, everything that comes through palace channels. I can provide you with specific medical protocols to help your bodies recover." "And then?" Alexander asked. "Then, you decide how you want to handle Victoria's crimes. What she's done constitutes assault, fraud, and potentially attempted murder, depending on how the courts interpret long-term poisoning. The evidence I've gathered would be more than sufficient for criminal charges." Isabella saw something shift in Alexander's expression, a hardening that she had rarely witnessed in their 7 years together. The gentle, trusting prince was being replaced by someone harder and more calculating. "She won't expect us to fight back," he said slowly. "She's probably counting on our discretion, our desire to avoid scandal." "What are you thinking?" Isabella asked. Alexander looked at her with eyes that seemed suddenly much older than his 32 years. "I'm thinking that Victoria has underestimated us both. She's assumed we would remain passive victims forever." "Alexander," Isabella said carefully, "I know you're angry." "Angry?" Alexander's voice was sharp. "Isabella, this woman has stolen 7 years of our lives. She's poisoned us, lied to us, manipulated us, and destroyed our chances of having the family we've dreamed of. She's turned my memories of my mother into a source of pain and betrayal. Angry doesn't begin to describe what I'm feeling." Isabella had never seen this side of her husband before. The royal authority that lay beneath his gentle nature, the steel spine that came from generations of rulers. It was both frightening and thrilling to witness. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful Scottish countryside that contrasted so sharply with the turmoil in the cottage. When he turned back to them, his expression was resolved. "We're going to expose her," he said simply. "All of it. The poisoning, the manipulation, the succession plot. We're going to make sure she faces the full consequences of what she's done." "The scandal will be enormous," Dr. Whitfield warned. "The press will have a field day." "Let them," Alexander said coldly. "Victoria chose to wage war against our marriage and our family. Now she can face the consequences of that choice publicly." Isabella felt a mixture of relief and terror at his words. For days, she had been carrying the burden of this secret alone, trying to decide how to proceed. Now Alexander was taking charge, and his royal authority was fully engaged. "There's something else," she said quietly. "I destroyed the vitamin supplements Victoria gave me. I've stopped taking anything she provided." Alexander nodded approvingly. "Good. Dr. Whitfield, how quickly can you implement the medical protocols you mentioned?" "I can start immediately," the physician replied. "But I should warn you both, recovery won't be instant. It may take months before your bodies fully clear these substances and return to normal fertility levels." "But it's possible," Isabella asked. "We could still have children." Dr. Whitfield's expression grew gentler. "Your Highness, based on my analysis, I believe you could conceive naturally within 6 months of beginning proper treatment. Perhaps sooner." For the first time since reading Eleanor's letter, Isabella felt genuine hope blooming in her chest. The family she and Alexander had dreamed of might still be possible. The children Victoria had stolen from them might yet exist. Alexander moved to sit beside her on the sofa, taking her hand in his. "We're going to get through this," he said firmly. "All of it. Victoria's betrayal, the medical treatment, the public exposure of her crimes. We're going to reclaim our lives and our future." Isabella squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his determination. The naive prince and princess who had trusted Victoria blindly were gone forever, replaced by a couple who finally understood the true nature of the war that had been waged against them. As evening fell over the Scottish countryside, the three of them continued planning their next moves. By the time they finished talking, they had outlined a comprehensive strategy for exposing Victoria's crimes while protecting themselves from further manipulation. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in 7 years, Isabella and Alexander were fighting it together, armed with the truth and determined to reclaim everything that had been stolen from them. The palace felt different when Isabella and Alexander returned from Scotland. The ornate halls that had once seemed warm and familiar now appeared threatening, every corner potentially hiding another of Victoria's manipulations. Isabella found herself studying the staff with new suspicion, wondering who else might be complicit in the elaborate deception that had controlled their lives for 7 years. They had spent the week in Scotland meticulously planning their next moves with Dr. Whitfield's help. The physician had provided them with detailed medical protocols to reverse the damage Victoria had done, along with comprehensive documentation of her crimes. More importantly, he had helped them understand that they weren't just fighting for justice. They were fighting for their lives and their future family. Alexander had been transformed by the revelations. The gentle, trusting prince had been replaced by someone harder and more strategic, though Isabella occasionally caught glimpses of his old self when he thought she wasn't looking. She knew he was still processing the betrayal, particularly the painful truth about Eleanor's complicity. Sometimes she found him staring at photographs of his mother with an expression of such profound hurt that it broke her heart. Now, as they prepared to implement their plan, Isabella felt a mixture of anticipation and terror. They had decided to gather more evidence before confronting Victoria directly, wanting to ensure they had an airtight case that couldn't be disputed or manipulated. Dr. Whitfield had suggested they needed to catch Victoria in the act of tampering with their food or supplements, providing undeniable proof of her ongoing crimes. "Remember," Alexander said as they dressed for dinner on their first night back, "everything has to appear completely normal. Victoria can't suspect that we know anything until we're ready to spring our trap." Isabella nodded, though the thought of sitting through another meal with Victoria, pretending everything was fine, made her feel physically sick. "How long do you think it will take?" Dr. Whitfield said he can have surveillance equipment installed in our private quarters within 48 hours. Once we have video evidence of Victoria or her accomplices tampering with our food or supplements, we'll have everything we need. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Dr. Whitfield had connections with a private security firm that specialized in high-profile cases. They would install hidden cameras in Alexander and Isabella's private dining room and bathroom, areas where Victoria would have access but wouldn't expect to be monitored. Meanwhile, Alexander would use his royal authority to quietly investigate Victoria's financial records and communications, looking for evidence of the payments and conspiracies mentioned in Eleanor's documents. As they made their way to the family dining room, Isabella forced herself to adopt the demeanor she had perfected over 7 years of marriage, slightly melancholy about their inability to conceive, but grateful for Alexander's support and Victoria's kindness. The performance felt grotesque now that she knew the truth, but it was necessary for just a few more days. Victoria was already seated when they arrived, looking elegant and composed in a dark blue dress that complemented her silver hair. She rose to greet them with her usual warm smile, and Isabella had to fight the urge to recoil from her stepmother-in-law's embrace. "Welcome home, dears," Victoria said, kissing Isabella's cheek with what appeared to be genuine affection. "I trust you had a restful week in Scotland?" "Very restful," Alexander replied, his voice betraying none of the fury Isabella knew he was feeling. "Just what we needed." "Wonderful. I've had cook prepare your favorite meal, Isabella, the salmon with herbs. I thought after a week of rustic cottage cooking, you might appreciate something more refined." Isabella managed a grateful smile, though the knowledge that Victoria had specifically requested her favorite meal sent chills down her spine. How many times had Victoria done this over the years, recommending dishes or suggesting menu changes, all while secretly orchestrating their poisoning? As they settled into their seats, Victoria began chatting about palace business and upcoming social events, playing the role of the devoted stepmother perfectly. She inquired about their health, their plans for the holiday season, and whether Isabella had given any more thought to the charitable causes she might want to support. "Actually," Victoria said as the first course was served, "I've been thinking about your situation, Isabella dear. I know how much you and Alexander want children, and I've been researching some new treatments that might help." Isabella's fork nearly slipped from her hand. The audacity of Victoria's suggestion was breathtaking. "That's very thoughtful of you," she managed to say. "There's a specialist in Switzerland who has had remarkable success with couples who have struggled with fertility. I could arrange a consultation if you're interested." Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We appreciate your concern, Victoria, but we're quite satisfied with Dr. Whitfield's care." "Of course, dear, but sometimes a fresh perspective can be valuable. This specialist uses some very advanced techniques that might not be available through traditional channels. Isabella realized with horror that Victoria was probably planning to send them to another doctor she controlled, someone who would continue the charade of treating their infertility while actually ensuring it continued. The woman's manipulations were so comprehensive that she had backup plans for her backup plans. "We'll consider it," Isabella said noncommittally, not trusting herself to say more. The rest of the dinner passed in a surreal haze of normalcy. Victoria told amusing stories about the neighboring kingdoms, discussed plans for the upcoming Christmas celebrations, and expressed her usual concerns about Isabella's health and well-being. To an outside observer, it would have appeared to be a loving family dinner. Only Isabella and Alexander knew they were dining with their tormentor. As they prepared to leave the dining room, Victoria made one final suggestion that sent ice through Isabella's veins. "Isabella, dear, you look a bit pale this evening. Perhaps you should resume taking those vitamin supplements I provided. I noticed you haven't been taking them regularly since you returned from Scotland." Isabella forced herself to appear surprised and grateful. "Oh, you're right. I completely forgot about them during our trip. Thank you for reminding me. I'll have them sent to your chambers tonight," Victoria said with a smile that now looked predatory to Isabella's eyes. It's important to maintain consistent nutrition, especially when you're trying to conceive. After they parted ways for the evening, Isabella and Alexander retreated to their private sitting room, both of them shaken by the encounter. "She's planning to restart the poisoning immediately," Isabella said, pacing by the fireplace. "Those supplements will be in our room within the hour." "Let her send them," Alexander said grimly. "It'll be perfect evidence once we have the cameras installed. Dr. Whitfield can analyze the current batch and compare them to the ones you were taking before Scotland." Isabella stopped pacing and looked at her husband. "Alexander, I can't take those supplements. Not even for a few days. Not knowing what they're doing to my body." "You won't have to," he assured her. "Dr. Whitfield gave us those substitute vitamins that look identical. We'll switch them out and let Victoria think she succeeded in restarting her regimen." As if summoned by their conversation, there was a soft knock at their chamber door. Isabella opened it to find Victoria's personal maid holding a small silver tray with a bottle of vitamins. "From Lady Victoria," the maid said with a curtsy. "She wanted to ensure you had these tonight." Isabella accepted the bottle with appropriate gratitude, closing the door before allowing her mask to slip. The vitamins looked innocent enough, small white pills in an elegant glass bottle with an expensive European label. Without the knowledge she now possessed, she would never have suspected they were anything other than high-quality supplements. Alexander took the bottle from her hands and examined it closely. "How many of these do you think you've taken over the years?" "Thousands," Isabella whispered. 7 years, every single morning. Victoria always made such a point of ensuring I never ran out. "We'll make sure she pays for every single one," Alexander said with quiet intensity. "But first, we need to build our case carefully. Dr. Whitfield will analyze these, and in a few days we'll have video evidence of how she's been tampering with our food and supplements." Over the next 48 hours, Isabella and Alexander maintained their facade, while Dr. Whitfield's security team discreetly installed surveillance equipment throughout their private quarters. The cameras were virtually invisible, hidden in decorative objects and household items that Victoria would never think to examine. On the third night after their return, their patience was rewarded. Isabella was in their bedroom reading when Alexander burst through the door, his phone in his hand, and his expression triumphant. "We have her," he said simply. Isabella rushed to his side as he played a video file on his phone. The footage was crystal clear, showing Victoria entering their private dining room in the early hours of the morning when the staff was still asleep. She moved with practiced efficiency, retrieving small vials from her purse and adding drops of clear liquid to the water glasses that were set out for their breakfast, to the cream pitcher that would be used for their coffee, and even to the fresh fruit that had been arranged on their breakfast tray. "There's more," Alexander said, swiping to another video file. This one showed Victoria in their bathroom, carefully opening Isabella's face cream and adding what appeared to be powder before stirring it in and resealing the container. "She's been doing this every night," Isabella said in amazement. "All these years, she's been sneaking into our private quarters and poisoning everything we consume." "Not just us," Alexander said grimly. "Dr. Whitfield caught her tampering with my shaving cream and aftershave as well. She's been extraordinarily thorough." Isabella felt a surge of rage, so pure it took her breath away. The violation was complete. Victoria hadn't just been controlling their diet and supplements. She had been infiltrating every aspect of their most private spaces, turning their own bedroom and bathroom into weapons against them. "The security team caught her on camera 3 nights in a row," Alexander continued. "We have enough evidence to prosecute her for attempted murder, assault, fraud, and conspiracy. Dr. Whitfield says the substances she's been using could have caused permanent damage if we'd continued for much longer." Isabella sank into their reading chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had discovered. "What happens now?" Alexander's expression was granite hard. "Now we end this. All of it." But even as he spoke, Isabella realized that Victoria's crimes went beyond what they had documented. The woman had been manipulating and deceiving them for 7 years, but she had also been preparing for the possibility that her deception might be discovered. Victoria was intelligent and strategic. She would have contingency plans. "Alexander," Isabella said slowly, "what if she knows we're on to her? What if she's been watching us as carefully as we've been watching her?" Her husband's confident expression wavered slightly. "What do you mean? Think about it. She survived in palace politics for decades. She's managed to manipulate 2 generations of the royal family without being caught. Do you really think she doesn't have ways of monitoring our activities?" As if to underscore Isabella's point, Alexander's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. "What is it?" Isabella asked. Alexander held up his phone, showing her a message from an unknown number. "Tomorrow morning, Blue Salon. Come alone if you want to protect what matters most." Isabella felt her blood turn to ice. "She knows. It appears so," Alexander said quietly. They stared at each other in the lamplight of their bedroom, both realizing that their carefully planned trap had somehow become a trap set for them. Victoria was still one step ahead, still controlling the game, even as they thought they were finally gaining the upper hand. "What do you think she wants?" Isabella asked. Alexander's expression was grim. "I think she wants to negotiate. She's been caught red-handed, and now she's looking for a way out that doesn't involve prison or complete disgrace." "Will you go?" "We'll go," Alexander corrected. "Together. We've spent 7 years letting Victoria control our lives separately. From now on, we face her as a united front." Isabella nodded, drawing strength from his determination. Tomorrow morning would bring the confrontation they had been building toward since discovering Eleanor's letter. Victoria's reign of manipulation was finally coming to an end, but Isabella suspected the final battle would be the most dangerous one yet. As they prepared for bed, both of them knowing sleep would be elusive, Isabella found herself thinking about the children she and Alexander might finally be able to have. Dr. Whitfield had assured them that with proper treatment, conception was not only possible, but probable. The family that Victoria had stolen from them might yet become reality. But first, they had to survive whatever Victoria had planned for tomorrow morning. And Isabella had a feeling that her stepmother-in-law's final gambit would be the most ruthless move yet in their 7-year war. The Blue Salon had never felt more ominous than it did that morning as Isabella and Alexander entered together, their hands clasped tightly. Victoria was already there, seated in the ornate chair that had once belonged to Alexander's grandmother, looking every inch the regal matriarch despite the circumstances. She had chosen her position carefully. With her back to the tall windows, the morning light created a halo effect around her silver hair, making her appear almost ethereal. But there was nothing ethereal about the cold calculation in her eyes. "Punctual as always," Victoria said, her voice carrying its usual warmth despite the tension crackling through the room. "Please sit. We have a great deal to discuss." Isabella noticed that Victoria had arranged the furniture to create a power dynamic. Two smaller chairs facing her larger one, forcing them to look up at her slightly. Even in defeat, the woman was still playing psychological games. "I think we'll stand," Alexander said coolly, his royal authority evident in every word. Victoria's smile didn't waver. "As you wish. I suppose this conversation was inevitable once you discovered Eleanor's pathetic attempt at posthumous conscience clearing." Isabella felt Alexander tense beside her at the dismissive reference to his mother. "You destroyed her," he said quietly. "You blackmailed her into silence while you tortured her daughter-in-law." "I protected this family," Victoria replied sharply, her mask finally slipping to reveal the steel beneath. "Eleanor was weak, just as she had always been. She would have destroyed your legitimacy with her guilt-ridden confessions if I hadn't managed the situation. By poisoning us for 7 years. Isabella spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite the rage coursing through her. Victoria turned her attention to Isabella with something that might have been respect. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for, my dear. I rather expected you to crumble when you learned the truth. Instead, you've managed to orchestrate quite an impressive investigation." "We have everything, Victoria," Alexander said. "Video evidence of you tampering with our food and personal items. Dr. Whitfield's medical documentation. Eleanor's letter and the documents from her safe. Your financial records showing payments to accomplices. It's over." Victoria laughed, a sound that was genuinely amused rather than bitter. "Oh, my dear boy, you think this is about evidence? You think this is a legal matter that will be settled in courtrooms?" She stood gracefully, moving to the window where the morning sunlight illuminated her perfectly composed features. "You've both learned a great deal about power politics in the past week, but you're still thinking like naive children. Let me explain what's really going to happen here." Isabella felt a chill of dread as Victoria's confidence became apparent. The woman wasn't behaving like someone who had been caught and cornered. She was behaving like someone who still held all the cards. "First," Victoria continued, "your precious evidence will never see the light of day in any courtroom. Do you know why? Because prosecuting me would require revealing Eleanor's complicity in the deception. You would have to explain to the world that your sainted mother knew I was preventing you from having children and chose to protect your legitimacy rather than your happiness." Alexander's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "More importantly," Victoria went on, "you would have to explain why Eleanor believed your legitimacy needed protecting in the first place. Are you prepared for that conversation, Alexander? Are you ready for the world to learn about the circumstances of your birth?" Isabella saw Alexander go pale and realized that Victoria's leverage over Eleanor went deeper than any of them had understood. Whatever secret Victoria held about Alexander's birth was significant enough to have kept Eleanor silent even as she watched Isabella suffer. "You're bluffing," Alexander said, but his voice lacked conviction. Victoria moved to an antique writing desk and retrieved a manila envelope. "I have DNA evidence, Alexander. Tests that were run shortly after your birth, showing that King Edward was not your biological father. Eleanor had an affair with her bodyguard. A touching love story, really, if somewhat inconvenient for the succession." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella felt the ground shift beneath her feet as she realized the full scope of what Victoria was revealing. If Alexander wasn't Edward's biological son, his claim to the throne was illegitimate. Their entire life, everything they had worked for, could be destroyed with the contents of that envelope. "Eleanor came to me with this secret when you were still an infant," Victoria continued conversationally. "She was terrified, guilt-ridden, desperate for help in managing the situation. I provided that help. I've spent 32 years protecting your secret, Alexander, ensuring that no one else ever learned the truth about your parentage." Alexander sank into one of the chairs, his royal composure finally cracking. "You're lying? I wish I were." It would make this conversation much simpler. Victoria returned to her seat, still holding the envelope. But DNA doesn't lie, and neither do the medical records I've carefully preserved all these years. Your mother's love affair with Captain Marcus Thornfield was passionate but brief. Unfortunately, it coincided perfectly with the period when she should have been conceiving with the king. Isabella moved to stand behind Alexander, placing her hands on his shoulders in a gesture of support. She could feel the tremor running through his body as he processed the devastating revelation. So you see, Victoria continued, exposing my crimes would require exposing yours. The moment you present evidence of my deception, I will be forced to reveal the truth about the royal succession. The monarchy would survive the scandal, of course, but you would not. Prince James would become the rightful heir, and you would be quietly removed from the line of succession. Isabella finally understood the full depth of Victoria's strategy. It wasn't just about positioning James as the heir. It was about having the power to control or destroy Alexander completely. For 32 years, Victoria had held his entire life in her hands. "What do you want?" Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria's smile returned, warmer now that she had regained control of the situation. "Oh, I've always wanted stability and prosperity for this family. I want you both to continue your royal duties with the understanding that I will continue to guide important family decisions. And I want you to accept that children are simply not in your future." "Never," Alexander said, looking up with fierce determination despite his obvious devastation. "I won't let you continue poisoning us." "You misunderstand," Victoria said gently. "The poisoning, as you call it, will end immediately. I no longer need such crude methods to ensure you remain childless. You see, I've spent the past 7 years documenting your infertility very carefully. Medical records, specialist consultations, treatment failures, all meticulously recorded and filed with the royal physicians." Isabella felt sick as she realized what Victoria was saying. "You've created a medical history that supports the lie." "Precisely. Any future doctor you consult will see a clear pattern of unexplained infertility spanning nearly a decade. Even if Dr. Whitfield were to suggest that you were poisoned, it would appear to be the desperate theory of a physician trying to explain away his own failures. Who would believe such an outlandish claim?" The elegance of Victoria's long-term planning was terrifying. She had created not just the reality of their childlessness, but a documented medical justification for it that would be nearly impossible to disprove. "There is, however, one alternative," Victoria said, her tone becoming almost conversational. "If you're truly determined to have children, I could arrange for the medical records to be adjusted. The infertility treatments could suddenly become successful. Isabella could conceive within months." Isabella's heart leaped despite herself. "What's the catch?" "The child would be raised with full knowledge of their true heritage. They would understand that their grandfather was not King Edward, that their father's claim to the throne rests on a foundation of deception. When the time comes, they would step aside gracefully, allowing Prince James or his children to inherit the crown." Alexander stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "You want us to raise our child to give up their birthright? I want you to raise your child with honesty about their family history," Victoria corrected. "The throne was never truly yours to pass on, Alexander. At least this way, you could have the family you've always wanted while ensuring a smooth transition of power when the time comes." Isabella stared at Victoria in horrified fascination. Even now, offering them the chance at parenthood they had desperately wanted, the woman was manipulating the situation to serve her own ends. The child they conceived would be raised knowing they had no real claim to power, psychologically prepared to abdicate in favor of James's line. "And if we refuse?" Alexander asked. Victoria's expression grew sad, almost pitying. "Then you continue as you are, childless, but with your secret safe and your position secure. You would rule well, Alexander, and when your time comes, James will inherit a stable and prosperous kingdom." It's not the worst legacy a king could leave. The room fell silent as Isabella and Alexander absorbed the full weight of their options. They could expose Victoria's crimes, but only by destroying Alexander's legitimacy and their own future. They could accept childlessness and live with the knowledge of what had been stolen from them. Or they could have the family they wanted, but only by accepting that their children would never truly inherit the power that was supposedly their birthright. "I need time to think," Alexander said finally. "Of course," Victoria replied graciously. "This is not a decision to be made hastily. Take all the time you need. But remember, the medical records and DNA evidence I possess will not remain secret forever. It would be unfortunate if they were to surface at an inopportune moment." Isabella felt a surge of rage at Victoria's threat, but also something else, a sudden clarity that cut through the confusion and manipulation. She had spent 7 years being Victoria's victim, allowing herself to be shaped by the woman's lies and deceptions. But the revelation of Alexander's true parentage changed everything. "You know what, Victoria?" Isabella said, stepping forward. "You're right about one thing. This isn't about evidence or courtrooms or legal proceedings." Victoria raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the shift in Isabella's tone. "This is about power," Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger. "And you've made a crucial miscalculation. You assume that Alexander's legitimacy matters more to us than anything else. You assume we'll sacrifice our happiness, our family, our future to protect a throne that was built on a lie." Alexander looked up at his wife with growing understanding and admiration. "But you're wrong," Isabella said, moving to stand beside Alexander. "We don't want a crown that comes with your manipulation and control. We don't.